Welcome to Mindful with Minaa, where we explore how mindfulness can enhance your relationships and well-being. I'm your host, Minaa B, a licensed social worker, mental health educator, and author. Through insightful discussions, I will guide you towards self-awareness and self-efficacy, empowering you to effectively manage your relationships, reduce burnout, and be more present with yourself. So let's jump into today's episode. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Mindful with Minaa, the space where we talk about emotional wellness, and I give you the tools that you need to better your relationships, enhance your well-being, and engage in intentional living. Before I dive into today's episode, I do want to remind you to rate this podcast. Please subscribe to this podcast and also share this podcast because it goes a long way. I also want to share with you that on November 15th, I am hosting my first workshop in New York City called The Reframe. The Reframe is an emotional wellness workshop and a creative gathering designed to really help you get to the root of those thoughts that really impact your behaviors, understanding those patterns that you engage in that you don't want to engage in anymore. And it's also a space for community building that is going to be happening on November 15th. And I wanted to share that I decided to extend the early bird ticket rates until October 17th. So this is an opportunity for you to grab your tickets as soon as possible. It is going to be a very intimate gathering, and I want it that way because I really want to be intentional about what it looks like to cultivate community. And I think that whenever I go to events, especially when it's a large crowd, I find that it can be really hard for people to connect, especially when you're in a space where you're learning so much information, you're being talked at a lot. And so this is going to be on a smaller scale, around 12 people. And I really just want it to be a space that's intentional for people to come in, share what's on their hearts, unburden themselves from the things that they're carrying, and most importantly, gain the tools and the wisdom and the insights that you need to break those patterns that are no longer helping you grow, and also set new intentions for the new year. So that is what the Reframe is all about. That's what we're going to be doing here in New York City on November 15th. So head to the description box where you can find the registration link and make sure you also share it with a friend. Okay. So today's episode is something that I think a lot of you are going to resonate with, especially women, and you might feel this deeply because I want to talk about eldest daughter syndrome. It is a term that's been circulating on social media, but one that's rooted in very real psychological patterns that often trace back to something called parentification. So if you've ever been the person who had to grow up too fast, the one who always felt responsible for keeping the peace, holding everyone together, or being the strong one, this episode is for you. So I want to start with defining eldest daughter syndrome because it's not a formal diagnosis. So you're not going to find this diagnosis in the DSM, but it is a lived experience that many eldest daughters share. It's the invisible emotional labor that often comes from being the firstborn girl in a family, especially in households where there is instability, financial strain, or emotionally unavailable parents. The eldest daughter often becomes a third parent, or what I like to call a mini mother in the home, not because she wants to, but because she has to. She becomes the helper, the mediator, the caretaker, not just to her parents, but also to her siblings and maybe even other family members. And she learns to meet everyone else's needs while ignoring her own. Over time, this can lead to parentification, which is when a child takes on roles and responsibilities that should belong to the adults in their life. And when parentification happens, it can be very, very damaging. So if you have experienced parentification, I want you to think about the emotional toll it took on you and the impact it has taken on you. But I want to define two different types of parentification because there's different ways parentification can show up. So as I said, parentification happens when a child is expected to act like the parent. And when it comes to eldest daughter syndrome, you become the mini mother in the home, and you are responsible for the emotional needs of others, sometimes even the physical needs of others. And then you also might have to manage certain tasks. So, first, we have instrumental parentification. This is when the child takes on tangible adult like responsibilities. So, this can look like cooking, cleaning, doing your siblings' homework, ironing their clothes as well as your clothes, or even sometimes your parents' clothes. Or it can look like helping a parent with bills or even translation in immigrant families. So that is what instrumental parentification looks like. But then we have emotional parentification. This is when a child becomes the emotional support system for their parents or even their siblings, comforting them through fights, financial stress, or loneliness. In both cases, the child's emotional needs are neglected. That is the key word here, because you might be hearing this and saying, well, I don't think some of this sounds so bad. Like, is it bad for a child to be someone else's emotional system in the home? The problem is when that child's emotional needs becomes neglected because they are required to sacrifice their own needs or ignore their own needs to tend to the needs of others in the home, especially if the eldest daughter or the parentified child has to tend to the needs of their siblings because the parents are engaging in emotional neglect. The parents are emotionally immature, which ends up which in result makes them emotionally unavailable parents. And so that is when the child, as I said, becomes the mini mother of the home. A child should never have to be a mini mother or even a mini father in the home. So that is why this is classified as a form of parentification, because the eldest daughter is learning early on that love is earned through service and their worth is tied to how much they can carry. And for many eldest daughters, that becomes the blueprint for how they operate in adulthood. And that's the key thing that I want you to be thinking about, especially if you were a parentified child. How does that show up in adulthood? Because if this is something that you've been dealing with since you were a child and you didn't get the help that you need, you didn't get the emotional support that you need, this can also play out in your other relationships. It can play out in work. It can play out in your friendships. It can even play out in romantic relationships. So I'm going to break down some different ways eldest daughter syndrome manifests later in life. First, it's chronic people pleasing. You might find it hard to say no because you've been conditioned to prioritize the needs of other people, including their comfort over your own. So chronic people pleasing is just neglecting your own boundaries because you feel like other people's needs become a priority. It comes before you and you start to suppress the needs that you have. Another way eldest daughter syndrome manifests later in life is through hyper-independence. And so you may struggle to ask for help, believing that needing others is a sign of weakness, or sometimes you believe that because you have had to carry the load your whole life, you create this story that no one else is capable or no one else is going to be able to help you because you have had to be the helper, that you don't even realize you're hyper independent. You feel like, only you have the answers sometimes. And so hyper independence can show up in a multitude of ways, but at the root of hyper independence is when we struggle to ask for help. Another thing is caretaking in friendships and relationships. So you might always play the therapist role or feel drawn to people who need fixing. And a lot of that might manifest because you grew up feeling that your worth came from how you helped people. You might feel that your worth is rooted in how you show up for others. And so you want to be seen as the person who is highly capable. And that feels like a badge of honor for you. And so I want you to really pay attention to that, because sometimes I find that when I am working with clients who struggle with eldest daughter syndrome, sometimes it feels like a badge of honor to be the eldest daughter while also experiencing a lot of anger, rage and frustration about having to be the eldest daughter and all of the responsibilities that came with it. And I think sometimes it's because that role also makes us feel good about ourselves, knowing that we're needed and knowing that we're capable and people can rely on us, while also getting angry that people have the audacity to rely on us. You see how, those two opposing things leads to, I would say, this inner confusion as well as this frustration internally, where you're trying to navigate the role that you want to have in your relationships and breaking free from that. So pay attention to how caretaking manifests in your friendships and relationships, but also pay attention to the ways you utilize caretaking as this badge of honor and as this thing that shows that you are a worthy, capable person. Another thing that happens is emotional burnout. So this is when you are constantly being the strong one, and it leads to exhaustion, it leads to resentment, and sometimes even depression or anxiety. I always tell people burnout is not something that just comes from having a long work shift or experiencing a lot of demands at work. Sometimes we're experiencing burnout from the relationships that we're in, as well as the roles that we're playing in our relationships that don't serve us. They just don't serve us. They don't serve you as the person. It also isn't serving the other person who you think is benefiting from you constantly fixing, because you're not giving them an opportunity to figure things out on their own and see what they're capable of, to learn to identify what their strengths are, because you're coming in and just saying, I'll fix everything, I'll problem solve for everybody, I'll find the solutions for everyone. And that becomes very exhausting. So emotional burnout is something I want you to pay attention to. Another thing that manifests is difficulty being vulnerable. So you may struggle to let people see when you're not okay, because your identity has always been rooted in being capable. So if I let people know I'm struggling right now, then who am I? That's number one. Will people respect me? How will they perceive me? So if any of these things sound familiar, and if you grew up hearing phrases like, you're so mature for your age, or you're like a second mom to your siblings, that's often a sign of early emotional role reversal. And role reversal is parentification. Research has shown that parentified children are at a higher risk for anxiety, depression, and codependency in adulthood. A study published in the Journal of Child and Family Studies found that emotional parentification specifically predicts difficulty in regulating emotions and maintaining balanced adult relationships. And that makes so much sense, because when your childhood teaches you that love equals responsibility, it's hard to experience relationships where you're simply loved for being and not doing. So I want you to know that it's possible to heal and break the patterns related to eldest daughter syndrome. It means learning that you don't have to earn your worth. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were never allowed to just be. So here are some practical, evidence-based strategies to help you begin this process of breaking free from this pattern. First, you need to relearn what it means to receive. Start with something simple. When someone offers help, say yes. Accept it, even if it's uncomfortable. Remind yourself that receiving doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. You need to learn how to be open to help. That is what interdependency is all about. It's about recognizing that, yes, I am self-sufficient, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't use support right now. It doesn't mean that I can't use community right now. It doesn't mean that help is not something that I can receive right now. You know what I mean? And so I want you to start with something simple. It could look like, hey, can you come over and maybe help me build this small table? It doesn't have to be something extreme, but be open to asking for help, but also be open to saying yes when someone offers the help. The next thing I want you to do is practice non-performative rest, because many eldest daughters only rest when they've earned it. So I want you to try to schedule rest because you need it, not because you checked off every task. Rest is not a reward, it's a right. It's something that we need in order to get clarity, in order to sustain our energy, in order to be productive. And I think we also need to realize that rest is productive. There are different ways that we can practice rest. I think I'm going to give you a little snippet around that in a different podcast because there are 7 types of rest that we all need. It's a framework that was created by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith. You can go ahead and listen to her TED Talk online where she talks about that. It's actually a TED Talk that I sent to all of my clients during intake because I find that a lot of my clients struggle to rest. A lot of my clients are eldest daughters. A lot of my clients were parentified children. And so I think in our culture and in American society, rest is something that we don't do because we perceive it as lazy. And a lot of us think we're supposed to earn it. And that's actually not the truth. So I want you to reframe how you see rest. Rest is not just sleep. There are so many other ways to practice rest. So listen to that TED Talk by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, The 7 Types of Rest. But I'm also going to do an episode around that. I think that needs its own separate episode. The next thing I want to share is setting boundaries without guilt. Boundaries don't mean disconnection, they mean sustainability. So when you say no, you're not rejecting people, you're protecting your energy so you can show up in a way that's healthy and grounded. Also, when you say no, you are providing people with a courtesy. You're letting people know what you can or cannot do so that they can now go and find the resource themselves. So stop seeing no as a form of rejection. Also, remember that boundaries are the rules and the guidelines you put on yourself. Rules are the requests that we put on other people, okay? Because a lot of us are confusing the word boundaries. Your boundaries are the rules and guidelines you put on yourself. So if you say, as an eldest daughter, I'm going to, maybe set up a better nighttime routine. I'm not going to take on tasks and responsibilities. So I'm going to put my phone on do not disturb at 8 p.m. and I'm going to disconnect from the world and I'm not going to check emails and I'm not going to do all of these things. That's your boundary. Now, if someone calls you at 9 o'clock when you say you don't want to be on the phone or you start to get an influx of emails around that time, if you decide to answer that phone call, if you decide to start checking those emails, you are the person that's breaking your own boundary, okay? So just remember that you are responsible for upholding your own boundaries. The next thing that can be really important is therapy or even support groups. Working with a therapist, especially one who understands family systems, can help you untangle the emotional dynamics that keep you stuck in caretaking roles. And if therapy isn't accessible, seek online support groups. I think support groups are so helpful when we are dealing with relational issues because you are able to find a like-minded community of people who have experienced the thing you experienced. And I do believe we heal in community. So just getting guidance from others and getting wisdom and insight from others can be so important, but also so helpful. So consider a support group if therapy is not an option, but also remember you can do both, okay? Another thing is do some inner child work. Parentified daughters often have an inner child that feels neglected or unseen, and you can start reconnecting with these journal prompts. So the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what did I need as a child that I didn't get? The next thing I want you to ask yourself is, what would I say to that younger version of me today? Because reparenting yourself is the process of giving yourself the safety, compassion, and care you missed growing up. The last thing I want to share is the importance of redefining strength, because strength isn't about enduring everything alone. It's about knowing when to rest, ask for help, and create balance. Being the strong one all the time might make you reliable, but it's also isolating. So let your strength evolve into softness. I want to leave you with this. Healing from eldest daughter syndrome is not about resenting your family or blaming your parents. It's about understanding the systems that shaped you and consciously choosing new ways to exist outside of survival mode. You're not meant to parent everyone around you. And remember, you're not a kid anymore. You are an adult, and you most likely are in adult experiences. You have adult relationships. So that means the adults around you also have to be willing to tap into their own agency and autonomy and give themselves the support that they need or find other resources without burdening you to be everything to them, but also stop burdening yourself to believe that you have to be everything to everyone. Okay. And so know that you're meant to experience reciprocal love, joy, and rest. So if this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to take one small step this week toward reclaiming your softness. Maybe that's delegating something at work, or saying no to a request, or letting someone take care of you for once. So thank you for tuning into Mindful with Minaa. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with another friend, especially another eldest daughter who needs this reminder. Make sure to rate and review this podcast because it helps this show so much. You can head to the description box to find other ways to connect with me and learn from me. If you haven't ordered my book, Owning Our Struggles, I highly encourage you to do that as well, because that book is all about the concept of community care and interdependence. I also encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter, Mindful with Minaa, so that you can continue to get weekly insights from me. And I want to remind you that taking care of yourself with the same love you give to everyone else is important. So be gentle with yourself. Until next time.